In episode 52 of the Mindfulness and Grief podcast, hospice nurse Beth Kavanaugh shares with us insights from her book, Some Light at the End, your bedside guide for peaceful palliative and hospice care. The Mindfulness and Grief podcast is brought to you by Awaken, my meditation for grief program that helps you cope with the heartache and pain of loss with mindfulness-based practices for your body, mind, and spirit. Join Awaken to participate in weekly meditation for grief groups. Access the complete mindfulness and grief course library that features guided meditations and streaming video, and connect with people who understand what you're going through in our live sessions. Grief is hard enough. You don't have to do it alone. Learn more and join the community at meditationforgrief.com. I am your host, Heather Stang, author of Mindfulness and Grief and the guided journal From Grief to Peace. If you find this podcast helpful, please click on the subscribe button so you'll be notified of future episodes, and leave a review so other people can find the Mindfulness and Grief podcast and benefit from the teachings. Beth Kavanaugh is a certified hospice and palliative care nurse and educator with over 14 years of experience in caring for terminally ill patients. She has been a registered nurse for over 24 years and holds a bachelor's degree in nursing from Creighton University. Beth has supported hundreds of patients and their families at inpatient units, in the home settings, and behind the scenes in hospice care. Compassion, patient autonomy, and transparent communication are at the core of her care philosophy. Beth hopes to demystify death and dying so this powerful moment will be embraced as a normalized and celebrated life event. She continues to work in hospice and has a private Reiki practice to support physical, emotional, and spiritual healing for adults and teens. Beth lives with her husband in Portland, Oregon, where they have almost successfully finished raising their 3 kids. Learn more at bethkavanaugh.com. So thank you for joining us today on the Mindfulness and Grief podcast. I'd like to welcome our guest, Beth Kavanaugh. Beth, welcome to the Mindfulness and Grief podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. And my history with hospice is a long one. My grandfather was on hospice when I was 17, and I didn't really know what it was. It was like this mysterious service that came in and, took care of him. And then my grandmother, who died about, I guess I want to say about 9 years this year. She was cared for so well on hospice. And I know a lot of our listeners may have someone that they're caring for on hospice right now, or may have lost a loved one. And I know that you've experienced hospice. You're not just a professional, but you are a family who receive support. And I thought maybe we'd open by just hearing your story of how you were introduced to it and what inspired you to do the work you're doing today.
Sure. Well, back in 1997, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I was a nurse at that time, a new nurse. I had a son. He was tiny. He was a baby. And I was not quite pregnant with my daughter, but I was pregnant with my daughter when my mom died. And mom had lung cancer for about 15 months, went through chemo, the whole thing. And she asked me to take care of her when she did sign up for hospice. And so I wasn't living in the same state as she was. And I brought my son down, and we, along with my siblings and my dad, we took care of my mom the last 3 months of her life. And, I felt really honored that my mom asked me to take care of her because she had never asked me for anything really. And she was a pretty stoic gal. So it felt very, that was kind of her way of opening up and feeling like I felt like she could really trust me, the fact that she asked. So, we went through the last months where you watch your mom decline, and it is a rough process. I was a nurse, so the only medical professional. So I was doing all the medication stuff and bathing her and taking her into the toilet. And we did have hospice, and we would consult with them when we needed to. They would come in and do visits throughout the week. And if we needed them, we would call them. And I was able to be with my mom when she breathed her last breath, and it felt like a really powerful spiritual experience for me. And it's just something I'll never regret. It was one of the hardest things I ever did. I remember being so tired, and, I was pregnant when she died. There were a lot of emotions going on because, here's my mom. I had all this anticipatory grief because knowing she would never really know my kids, it actually still hurts me. And that was, it's over 20 years later. I miss her every day. And I feel like I have this really sweet spiritual kind of relationship with her. And I developed that pretty quickly. But I think that's really, I have a lot of roads that led to me doing hospice work. But I do feel like that's one of the most pivotal for obvious reasons. The fact that I can relate to my patients and the families, and, I definitely feel their pain. But I also know that people will get through with this. And I do know that suffering is a part of this crazy human experience. And I love doing hospice work. It feels, it's just amazing to be able to be with families and patients when they're on this really intimate journey.
It does sound like such a understandably important time in your life. And I can imagine what it would be like. Well, I can only imagine what it would be like to be pregnant while you're tending to your mother who is dying, and just the whole circle of life. And that anticipatory grief is something, whatever the narrative is of whatever life people are living that we face. Can you talk a little bit about that, maybe for people who don't understand what anticipatory grief is, both through, as a professional and through your own personal experience?
Right. For me, I'm not a licensed counselor or psychologist or anything, but just based on me being a nurse and experiencing my mom's death. As I remember when we were in the oncologist office and she showed me the statistics, my mom was very pragmatic. And so, she opened up this book and it said something like, patients with lung cancer survive, maybe 5 years. And this was back in 1998. I don't know what the stats are now. But I just remember feeling like this ache right away. And being a nurse, I'm also very pragmatic. So I knew then my mom was going to die. And so it's this anticipation of your life without your loved one in it. And, I don't think my dad experienced it because I don't think he ever believed she would die. Because, his road and journey, they were very different from mine. He really felt like his job was to keep her healthy and well and be optimistic and believe that she would beat this thing, So the anticipatory grief stuff, it was hard because I really felt like I needed to be not a downer to be around while I was taking care of my mom. Yeah. She had a pretty good attitude during the whole thing. So I kind of kept it to myself. I didn't really share with share with her much about my own grief that was going on. But, I just did my own work on the side, and I felt it deeply.
Yeah, I think that's part of the exhaustion, not only the caregiving exhaustion, like the physical tending to of the body and the health, but the what do I show and what do I keep close to my chest? And it's hard to stuff those feelings down when they're staring you in the face. Like that takes a lot of emotional and psychic energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's, I think that's one of the things that we acknowledge in grief work is after a long illness, or doesn't even have to be long, whatever that means, how long is a piece of string? But like after you've been doing all of that loving work for someone that you care for who is dying, the goal then is to turn that care towards yourself.
Right.
So what do you see in, I know you were working with patients, and I want to talk, let you share for people who aren't familiar with hospice and what it can do, the benefits of hospice. But when you're working with a patient and then they die and the family is kind of left there, what do you notice in them? I know that there's no one single thing, but what are some of the common reactions that you have experienced?
I noticed that surprise is kind of one of the pieces. We can never really believe that our loved one is going to die, no matter how long or short their journey on hospice was. So I often feel like there's an element of surprise. And then, the devastating griefs, it catches people in very different ways. Kind of course, depending on the story and who's dying and how they're dying and when they're dying in their life. I've had patient family members, dance for joy because finally, they've made it to heaven and the pearly gates and they're going to be with their creator, and dancing around the room like joy, joy, joy. That's a little more rare. But I've also, and I get both, and I've had mostly the devastation, that people feel when somebody dies in that moment. It's just kind of shocking. And I've also just had people feel kind of numb and kind of confused, not really knowing what to do. It's a very bewildering moment. And my prayer for most people is to do what you want, but to ideally before this moment of death, really consider, what is something that I might want to do when my loved one dies? Or maybe even ask the person, what would something be that you'd want when you die? I love being able to offer people that will bathe them or freshen them up and then put a beautiful quilt over them. If they're in the home, sometimes they have a dress or a gown or a Oregon Ducks t-shirt that they want to wear and, put them in that's their favorite, whatever. I like having a moment of pause and ritual. And this is me, so not everybody is comfortable with this, but something to kind of, people still kind of want a little something to do. And I think it really does. It can help with the grief process later, to reflect back on this moment and, know that you were able to be with your loved one in that space.
Yeah. To show that the caring continues. I think that's a big part of that type of ritual is to show I still care. You still matter. Yeah. And there's a reason why rituals have been going on for thousands and thousands of years. They do help us feel connected. And you're right, it might not work for everybody. Sometimes it's finding something different. I love that you brought in Oregon Ducks. It reminds me, different people have different loves. When my great uncle died, his name was Joe Mills, and he was for a long time the president of the Carolina League, which is AAA baseball in North Carolina. And when he's in the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame. And when he died, at his funeral, he was dressed in his Hall of Fame blazer. And when they carried the casket, they played "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
Oh, I love that.
Crying. It was just such an appropriate funeral that he would have. And maybe he was there, I want to just picture him looking down on that moment. But I love that, my great aunt and her children had put that kind of thought.
Yeah. And they will forever remember that, any baseball game they go to, that will be their, that's his legacy, and his heart is all over that. So that's really sweet. I love stuff like that. I think music is really powerful, obviously. So.
Yeah. And it was kind of, interesting because it's played on an organ, because not all music translates from its natural setting to a church, but in this case, it was totally that.
That's really cute. I love that. What was his name? Uncle who?
Jim Mills. Joe Mills was his twin. Joe and Jim. So Jim Mills was the baseball guy. They were so fun. But let's switch topics a bit, because some people listening are going to be, grieving the loss of someone. Some people listening might be anticipating and might be in, working with hospice. And that's one of those words that has a lot of weight. That sometimes people hear the word hospice and fear overtakes them, whether they're a family member or patient, or sometimes it's that whole mystery. What is it? So could you just give us an explanation of what hospice is, what it does, its purpose? And I know you, when hospice came to you and your mother, you were a nurse, so you probably took on some tasks that the rest of us wouldn't be able to do.
Right. I mean, so hospice in general is the physical, emotional, and spiritual care of a patient and their family when the patient has 6 months or less to live. So it's not a caregiving service. We provide 24/7 phone access, and generally people who are on hospice are in their home, and they're being taken care of by their loved ones. And the hospice team includes a nurse, a social worker, a home health aide, bereavement, which is after somebody's died. A volunteer can come visit 4 hours a week. And we, I think I said chaplain, and a medical director, the physician or nurse practitioner. And the hospice, so when people are at home, the nurse will come in and visit 2 or 3 times a week, and will assess the patient physically, make sure their symptoms are being managed, really monitor for any pain issues, constipation, anxiety, delirium, shortness of breath, all those nursing things, vital signs. We really try to maximize the quality of their life, knowing that there's a limited quantity of their life. And the home health aide can come in and help with a bath or shower a couple times a week. And the social work is an amazing resource for, they're usually licensed clinical social workers, and they have amazing counseling skills, and they can help with family conferences, family dynamics, family issues that come up, financial issues, trying to find a place for your loved one to live if the care can't be managed in the home. And the chaplain, they provide amazing spiritual support, which is, all the existential questions that come up for both the patient and the family, like what's next? How have I lived? Have I lived well? Do I have any regrets, any untidy business before I leave, that I want to complete? They're just really amazing they can hold space for these very big questions. So it is a really holistic approach to care. But like I said, it's the family is doing the majority of the physical care in the home. So we also do a lot of education about how to change someone's briefs in bed, how to transfer them from the bed to the toilet, how to, administer medications, what each medication is. So we really are there to support them as they take care of their loved one at the end of life.
And some people might be in a healthcare facility too, such as, a nursing home or rehab center or something, or even a hospice house. I had a dear friend. She was my personal coach a long time ago, and I made the shift from being a web developer to a yoga therapist. And so she birthed me, a kind of thing. Not like my mother. My mother gets all the credit for that, but she really helped me find my meaning. And she died at the Klein Hospice House in Frederick, Maryland, which is a lovely facility. And I went and visited her there, and her room was beautiful, hung with her artwork she loved. It was such a sacred space for her. It wasn't, I haven't visited a lot of hospice houses, but it was a very special place, and I'm glad for the time and space we had there.
Yeah, I worked at a hospice home here in Portland, and I work at one right now in Vancouver, Washington. And I love working in a hospice home because we have our team there, and we can really dial in people's symptoms quickly and be there for them right away. Physically they're with us. So, and it's really a huge relief to family members to not have to do the physical care. So I love working in a hospice home for that reason alone. But you're right. I mean, a lot of patients are living in nursing homes and foster homes and assisted livings, and hospice can go visit them wherever they're living.
So I know it's going to be different probably for every hospice house in every community, but are there restrictions on getting into one, either financially or, and maybe we should even talk about the criteria of hospice in general. Let's actually start there. What are the things that a patient needs to be experiencing for hospice to be appropriate? Yeah. And not just appropriate, but legal, because there's legal restrictions with the healthcare system. Like, you have to have certain criteria to be able to receive that benefit.
Right, because it's driven by Medicare, and there's the Medicare hospice benefit. And so there really are very specific criteria for each person depending on their hospice diagnosis. So if they have, like my mom, lung cancer was her hospice diagnosis. So she needed to exhibit, weight loss more than 10% over the last couple months of her life, diminished appetite, increased fatigue, inability to, ambulate as much as she was, or, so each cancer is really specific. Alzheimer's it's got its own set of criteria. So it's really hard to know for the lay person, if your mom or dad or loved one meets criteria. So the best way to find out is to ask their following doctor if now is a good time for hospice. And, they'll know the criteria. You can also call up a hospice and ask for an informational visit. And a lot of times they'll come to the home and talk to you about hospice and even follow up with their doctor and say, hey, I saw this, and I think, Joe might be ready for hospice based on his, weight loss or his inability to swallow or whatever the signs are. So, it's really hard to say. I mean, just because people are 98 and old doesn't mean they qualify for hospice. A lot of those 98-year-olds are still,
well, I have a story about that because my grandmother was on hospice starting at 99. And she got approved for hospice. So, 6 months life expectancy was part of the criteria. She had vascular dementia. I don't remember exactly what the other criteria was. And then 6 months later, I'll use your term from your book, she graduated from hospice, where she was no longer considered eligible based on her health conditions.
Right.
And so, we had a hospice came to the nursing home, or not nursing home, but assisted living facility. Mm-hmm. And I was there, my mom was there, and we had a meeting. And I remember Edna kind of rolled her chair in, kind of sat in the door watching us. And, we signed the discharge papers and, and she was 99 and a half. And she actually died. I can't remember if it was that day or the next day.
What?
I know.
Oh, my God.
But here's the good news. The good news, not that she died, that wasn't unexpected, but it is still a shock. It is still very much a shock, even though she's 99 and a half and had been on hospice. But hospice had kind of a cooling off period where if the person died, I think it was within 48 hours, and I don't know if this was based on this particular hospice, they would still provide you with bereavement services. Mm-hmm. and other services, and which was lovely, to be able to still be in that family and receive, the cards and to know that, but, to be 99 and a half and to be like, you're no longer, I don't know. It was fascinating.
It really is. And that, and you were talking about the, how people are afraid of hospice, and the word hospice is a heavy word. And it is. I mean, it's a heavy word because, if I signed up for hospice, I tell you, even though I do the work, I'm not anticipating dying anytime soon. Yeah. And so I would have to go through all those emotional pieces to hopefully get to a place of acceptance of my death. So it is a heavy, scary word for people because they're confronting their mortality and it's very real. Like I said, I mean, the hospice criteria is very strict. So medical doctors don't refer people to hospice unless they've really been declining and things really aren't looking good. And there's not that many treatment options, and the treatment options are doing more harm than good at this point. So it really is a scary word. And I had another point, but I don't remember what it is.
Well, I'll kind of pick that up a little. I do a lot of public speaking for both state hospice associations and the oh, wow. Yeah, we're both having like word. We're just going to let that go. But in national hospice organizations, I'll say that. Yeah. National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. There we go. Forgive me, y'all, if you're listening, NHPCO. And so I get to attend a lot of conferences if I'm speaking at them. And there was a chaplain who came in to, I believe it was the Alabama Hospice Association conference, and he gave this wonderful talk to the hospice employees on how to have a conversation with a family and about how you do need to disclose that you're offering hospice. Mm-hmm. But he came in and kind of did a simulated conversation without using that word until the end. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing just how removing that word until the end made the conversation feel less threatening, because it was more of a, if we can come in and do this for you, would you want us to do this? Mm-hmm. If we can come in and help you manage this, would you want us to do this? And then kind of going through that. And then at the end saying, we can do this. It's called hospice. And it was just an interesting way of reframing it, which still you might have that reaction of, I mean, I remember when my granddaddy went on hospice and my grandmother, oh no, I mean, just she went into wailing mode, understandably. She loved that man. So I'm glad we're just having this conversation because there's kind of I don't know if stigma is exactly the right word, but there is a weight around it. And I'm hoping that just by having this conversation, I understand that we all know that word acceptance is cringy and hard when you're talking about death and grief.
Right.
And so it's understandable to have resistance and fear. And also my hope is for people who are having the conversation that you understand that it might be able to give you more quality time with your loved one.
Right. I mean,
it's hard to make that choice, but it's a good choice.
It is really hard to make that choice. And I never really understood that as a hospice nurse until I started having family conferences. I was part of that. And and I'd see the patient just go, I do not want you. I am not ready. I don't want to throw in the towel. And it's, it's really hard. Like you can offer it so many ways. But I mean, that is why I want to have the conversation, like you said, because I think if we're all in the space of realizing that we're all going to die at some point, there's benefits and burdens to every treatment option that's out there. And a lot of times it's harsh. And I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know why I said that, because really, like, the more I think about my own death, I'm like, it's going to take me some time to get over it.
Although I'll tell you, when I do some resilience training for hospice professionals too. And I always started off by saying, I want you to take care of yourself because I'm going to need you someday, possibly, maybe not, but I might. And so this is me paying it forward because I want someone at my bedside who is taking care of themselves and isn't burnt out and, and knows what they're doing really, really, really does matter. Yeah. So let's talk about your book a little bit, or a lot rather, because I think that it is, you wrote it really for the patient, which is wonderful because, again, you and I are kind of putting ourselves in the bed, so to speak. We can't really feel what it'll be like because we're not actually experiencing it, but we're trying to kind of imagine it and knowing that there will be some resistance for both of us, but hopefully some hope too, just based on experience, but also, that all that can exist. Yeah. So your book is called Some Light at the End, Your Bedside Guide for Peaceful Palliative and Hospice Care. So talk to us about what your aspiration for this book is. What do you hope it's going to accomplish for the reader?
Well, I mean, as a hospice nurse, I do so much education to the patient and the family. And I've had so many conversations at the bedside with everybody. I wrote it to the patient because they are the star of the show. And I feel like if they're equipped with the right information, they can make decisions, about their care, their life, and their death. And I think to be given information about what it's going to look like, some possibilities, like I was talking about rituals, some things they might want, just to think about it, and they can offer suggestions about what they want in their life so that the loved one isn't kind of trying to figure out what they might want. But every step of the way that I wrote this book, I was thinking about the caregiver, because the caregiver is the family who is doing the physical care of the patient, usually trying to manage the medications, usually trying to figure out what to do with the oxygen concentrator, how to change somebody in bed, how to bathe somebody in bed. There's a lot of new information for the family. And I know I have seen them. It feels overwhelming and like a lot. So I just really wanted to provide a resource for them that they could look through at 3 a.m. when they're up in the morning and wondering, what do I need to do about my dad's pain right now? It's just, we come in, the hospice nurses come into the home setting and will educate somebody about something, but people can only retain so much in that moment. And so I just wanted something they can refer back to, like, oh, she said something about Ativan or something, like, where is that and what's that for? And so I really hope that it can provide some relief for patients and their caregivers, because it really can be a lot.
Yeah, the brain already has enough trouble remembering things on a good day for many of us. But when you're going through that type of stress and you're probably not sleeping as much as your body needs, it's just too hard to take in all this information. So I think this is a really great idea. And also, one thing you do in there is you talk about the different roles of the team members. Because even as someone who works with hospice organizations, sometimes, like, I don't even know that I understand the depth of all that a social worker on a hospice team can do. I probably have a better grasp of what the complementary therapists can do, because some hospices do have funding for music therapists or art therapists or massage. Actually, I wrote a chapter on complementary therapies in hospice for intimacy. And, I used what I do, meditation and yoga therapy, but I also got to interview a lot of other complementary therapists. And, it was just so inspiring, because in that role, people get to kind of extend that spiritual care of, allowing people to express feelings, allowing patients to, like you said, deal with unfinished business. But things like, what can a social worker do for you when you're in hospice? There's a lot, especially if funds are limited or family dynamics are a bit wonky, which happens with most families. Totally normalize that.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that you're putting that out there and kind of demystifying, I think, this experience.
Yeah. And I think people just, they don't even know the questions to ask, when their loved one's on hospice. I mean, if you don't know what a social worker is, or have never worked with a social worker, you're not going to say, what is the social worker going to do for me? You just kind of hope they're going to tell you and explain it all to you. And maybe they do, but maybe you're not understanding, or maybe you're, not taking it all in at the time. So, I think it can be confusing for a lot of families, just, how to navigate hospice, and how to best utilize the team, how to best utilize this benefit, because it really is an amazing, it augments the care that's happening in the home. It's very sophisticated medical care. But a lot of times people don't really know what to ask. I mean, when I was taking care of my mom and I had hospice support, I almost never called them. It didn't even occur to me, to call them when I had questions about things. And I don't know if it's because they didn't tell me to, or if I was just too in the weeds with my mom. But, they're available. There's a nurse available 24/7 that you can call.
Let's talk about emotional self-care for patients and families. What's some guidance that you can offer people who are going through this and feeling all that anxiety and just angst and exhaustion?
Yeah. Well, I think normalizing it, it's part of it, because of the grief piece and the physical labor piece. All of those pieces, they really do contribute to an exhausted body. So, and mind and soul. And so I do think it's important that you, first of all, throw all of your expectations in the river. Like, we just don't know how this is going to go. Show up, do your best. Don't have high expectations of yourself or your loved one, and offer a lot of grace to everybody who's involved in this, because we all this is a kind of a crisis time, right? I mean, when your loved one is dying, and so people really operate differently in all these areas. So don't strive for perfection. It's like awkward and clunky, and you'll do some crazy things like trying to bathe somebody in bed or pull somebody up in bed. It's just not always smooth. And so just, laugh when you can laugh, because there's enough difficulty that's going on anyway. I do think it's important to have some practical information on caring for dying people. And most hospices actually have a binder where they have really specific information in there about the medications they're given. And I think having something tangible that you can refer back to, or, my book, Some Light at the End. And I'm sure there's other books out there. I just don't know what they are right now. I do think it's important to have a team of people. So, in families, there's always at least one person who's like, she's going to be the caregiver, and it's often a she. And so really try to have some honest family conversations about how much we can all do, because nobody should have to do the bulk of the caregiving, in my humble opinion. So if you can kind of spread it out and dilute it so that, people don't end up totally burned out and fried. I mean, caring for someone is hard, and it can do damage to your health if you're not taking care of yourself. So really share the wealth. Everybody should pitch in. Ask for what you need. Ask your friends and family. One of my dreams to have the community just gather around like a band of angels. I think churches do an amazing job of that. A lot of times they just show up, and there's meals that come, and there's people that visit, and there's trips to the grocery store. And, I want that to be part of life, whether you're in a church or not.
That's social support. If we could all get that, and family support, like both of those, I think can be challenging. And I see in the grief work for the person who's taken on the burden. And I use that word burden. I don't mean like I know it's an act of love. So forgive me for using it in that way, but who's taking on the bulk of the work, like that can impact your family relations through grief too. And, so how it is during the hospice period can carry over. And I also just see different kind of qualities of what I'll just say physical exhaustion in people who've done the bulk of the caregiving, where, I'm really just trying to help them learn how to take care of themselves again and get some sleep. Because like you said, it can have such a detrimental effect on your health. And if you're not healthy, it's hard to deal with everything else.
Right. And, I know a lot of people can't afford to have, pay for a caregiver to come in, or, I think if you can ask friends to come in and relieve you so that you can take a nap in the back bedroom, or on the floor, by the fridge, anywhere. I'm just a big proponent of like getting some sleep, trying to eat well. So maybe when you ask people to bring meals, ask them to bring some healthy meals for you, And I just think it's really important to feel you're well, but a lot of that involves having somebody else come to the home so that you can either leave the home or go rest in a quiet place.
I know some family caregivers feel a lot of guilt in turning over the reins for a couple of hours. Like, I'm somehow abandoning my loved one if I, have a volunteer, have someone come in to sit with them and go, just go have a normally abnormal grocery trip, or whatever it is. And I know there isn't like one thing that I can say, or probably that you can say to people who are feeling that, but I really do see that self-care as an act of love for the person you're caring for.
Amen. Amen. I mean, I am grumpy. When I'm tired, I am grumpy and I am no fun to be around. So I'm a much better caregiver when I've had some sleep and some rest and, all those things.
What's the role of the volunteer in hospice? Because there are volunteers.
I know. And the volunteers are amazing. They're so amazing, honestly. It's been sad with COVID because we haven't been able to utilize our volunteers, and the volunteers were devastated by it as well. But they are generally, they can come into the home 4 hours a week, and they can, do whatever they want to do. I mean, they can chat, they can do some light housekeeping, they can just sit by and maybe read a book or read to the patient, just depending on where the patient is in this process. They can visit with the patient. Sometimes it's just nice to have somebody else who's not a family member. I mean, like my mom didn't really want to talk with me about her journey, journey to dying. And somebody else might just be a safer bet. Maybe they're approachable. I mean, the volunteers are really amazing. Hospice volunteers have big hearts, and they generally have had their own experience caring for somebody who was dying, and they were so affected by hospice. That's generally why they get into hospice and to do this work. So, I mean, their heart is really in the right spot, and 4 hours is a long time to have somebody, at least somebody can go and run an errand and maybe take a nap, and then, they can provide that kind of relief for the caregiver.
Yeah, gives them that space that isn't available if someone else isn't around. And you're right. There are. I think I went through volunteer training. I did it mostly because I was going to be working like volunteering on the bereavement side, which is different than sitting with a patient. But like I volunteered to go in and do, just to sit in on the grief groups or to teach meditation for grief, in different groups. So I went through the official volunteer training with hospice. It's something I highly recommend when you're ready. If you're still working on your own grief, if you're still experiencing those deep and painful emotions, that's time to kind of bring it in and do the self-care for you. But at some point, a lot of us who have been through, I mean, look at what I'm doing for my career. This is all because of my loss experience. And it's not that we ever want to say that it's what anyone quote unquote should do. But if you feel called when you're ready to go sit with a patient and provide the relief to a family member, by all means do the hospice volunteer training. It's deep work. Not only do you learn how to physically handle a patient, but you also have to face, at least in the training I did, we did a meditation on our own death so that we could empathize, with the patient. But it was really a beautiful experience, and I'm glad I did it.
And I love, Heather, that you teach mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness, I think, is a really beautiful approach to caring for somebody also. Any way you can get it, just the mindfulness piece. There's so many ways to get instruction on how to be more mindful / doing meditation. I think in the course of my career of nursing, which has been 25 years, I have always kind of sought out ways to stay more grounded and more centered, because especially in hospice, I mean, there's so much suffering that we witness and we're holding space for. And So I think doing some kind of a daily ritual or practice would be really beneficial for any caregiver, whatever that is. I mean, it could be prayer for somebody for 10 minutes. It could be a guided meditation for 10 minutes. It could be a 10-minute body scan, anything to kind of stay more centered. And it has this cumulative effect on people where you'll find you're just less flappable. It's just, you have more composure and you're able to deal with your own suffering and your loved one's suffering. And by dealing with it, I don't mean it's going to go away, but you just kind of are able to hold beautiful space with grace, because it is their intense emotions.
Yeah.
I love that you teach that.
Thank you. I love teaching it because it also reminds me to practice too. And one of the things I think I love so much about mindfulness and meditation, really, whether it's prayer or focusing meditation or relaxing meditation or mindfulness meditation, is when we're going through something like caring for a loved one who is dying or tending to our own grief, the brain, you can't really think your way through it. It's not a problem to be solved like, 3 + 4 is 7. But yet we try to intellectualize it. Like, how do I get through this in my brain? But these practices impact your body so that your body becomes an ally. For instance, there's a lot of research that shows that when you practice mindfulness, it shrinks your amygdala, which is your center of reactivity. And so right there, you have a biological shift that can help you without having to figure out why.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Right? Because I think, the figuring it out, the reconstructing our narrative is a really big part of our grief work. But when you're in acute grief or anticipatory grief, the thinking brain isn't always our ally.
Right. Oh my gosh. It's just that alone. And I think when people have that kind of scientific information, right, it's just more impetus to do something like that. And I do really think even just 10 minutes a day, I've struggled with years, I say that, and I don't really practice too much, but I have for years, since about 2008, I have struggled with establishing a meditation practice. And, some months are better than others, some days are better than others. And I just think any little bit, as long as you, especially when you are caring for someone who is dying, if you can find a space where you can center in that way, it would really be helpful.
And, your practice doesn't have to be perfect. You have benefits. Certainly the research shows that frequency is more important than duration. So a little bit every day.
Right. And I often end up falling asleep. So,
Well, you probably need it,
That's what I keep telling myself.
You probably do. Different schools of meditation have different outlooks on this. Like, some of them are like, you must not fall asleep, they'll give you a little tap with bamboo. And then, other schools of thought are like, well, if you fall asleep, then this is the school I come from, is if you fall asleep, you probably needed it. If it is something that happens all the time, you need to look at your lifestyle, or are you avoiding something? Like, what is it that's causing that? You use it as information rather than as judgment, which I really like that, where it's like, okay. And so when I'm working with, in Awaken, which is my meditation and journaling for grief program, the first thing we work on is sleep. Sleep and relaxation is everything in the beginning, because you can't do mindfulness. Well, you can, but I don't want to put a big can't on there, but it's harder to be mindful when you're foggy.
Yes.
So let's get the body rested and not judge yourself if you're sleepy, because that's the cruel part of grief, is that you're exhausted, but you can't sleep. I mean, one of the many, many cruelties of grief. That's probably a lesser one than missing your person, but it's, in terms of the healing your body part, that's just so hard. But there are things you can do. I've been really focused on doing self-hypnosis meditations before bed.
Ooh.
Let me tell you, I mean, I hope I haven't mentioned this too much on the podcast, so forgive me, guys, if I have, but I wear a Fitbit, and so I track my sleep score. And ever since, and I already slept well, I already had a decent score, but ever since I started putting on, I'll give a shout out to the recorder, Michael Seeley. I think he's, from what I've found, what little I've found about him, he's an Australian actor and hypnotherapist. Cool. So I found him on Spotify, and I've been doing his fall asleep fast. I'm getting like 8 hours of good, solid sleep, and my sleep score is in the high 80s and 90s. So I just want to bow to him.
Listening to an Australian man try to lull me to sleep. I'm not sure which way it would take me, but hopefully to sleep.
it probably will, because there's, it's the music and the suggestions he's giving, and and I hope that people who use my guided meditation for sleep have the same impact. But I can't listen to myself. Guide myself, and my mom can't either. She's like, I love that you do this. I love guided meditations, but if I'm listening to your meditation the whole time, I'm just thinking, oh, that's my baby. So she's not, actually.
That's so cute.
Not cute. So she uses some of my teachers' meditations, but that's something I recommend to people. Whether you're caregiving, family caregivers are under so much stress. And no matter how much support you have, it not only you and I have talked a lot about just the day-to-day challenges of taking care of the person's physical well-being and all that, but your heart's being just totally squished and under the ice. So we're coming to the end of this podcast, sadly, and I think you've have given us so much information and guidance that you're demystifying. I'm using that word again, but demystifying hospice. And I'm grateful for this, because we're all going to, unfortunately, have to deal with this at some point, in most cases, with someone in our life, and knowing that there's a resource out there that can help us through. I think that at least takes that off our shoulders. So can you talk to us about where we can find more about you and your book?
Yeah, you can find my book, which is called Some Light at the End, at my website, bethkavanaugh.com. And you can buy it, Amazon and all the other places. So it's definitely out there and ready for you. I had one thing that I wanted to talk about. Is that okay, Heather?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, is there anything else you want to share?
Oh, good.
Let's go to that.
It just kind of percolated just in the last second. But, with people who are taking care of hospice patients, dying it's very individual. And I think the caregiver can feel an enormous responsibility for their loved one who's dying, feel an enormous responsibility for the pain, the suffering, managing their symptoms, how they die, if they're there when they died. And I just want you to know that death is really, even though I kind of lay out what it in general looks like when people die, there is no way that everybody dies. And the patient has to do this work of dying on their own. It's a very individual, intimate journey, and they'll have people supporting them and stuff, but internally, they're kind of doing their own work. And so there's really only so much you can do as their caregiver. And then when it comes to the actual dying process, sometimes patients die suddenly, sometimes they die. It takes them a long time to die. sometimes they start to die as soon as family leaves the room. Sometimes patients have a terminal event and they die quickly. So a lot of times there's all these unanticipated things that happen. And I know a lot of caregivers have either guilt or shame for how things happened. And I just want them to know, a lot of times, like as a hospice nurse, I've had patients die when I'm right there in the room with them, and I had no idea that they were actually going to be dying in that moment. So I want people to experience some relief just knowing that, and not have, I want to absolve everybody of any guilt that they might feel about how things happened or went down when they were taking care of their loved one on hospice, because showing up, being there is the most important thing you can do. And, things just happen that we could never anticipate. So
I am so glad that you said that, because I think that is the number one most common experience I hear from people who are grieving after a long-term illness. Mm-hmm. You said it all. I'm not going to add to it, because what you said was absolutely beautiful and perfect. And if listeners need to play that on repeat over and over and over again, I hope they will. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather.
Oh, thank you, Beth. I'm grateful we had this conversation. Thanks for your time and your energy and your spirit.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Mindfulness and Grief podcast. Please help us spread the word and subscribe to this podcast, or even write a review. A special thank you goes to our podcast engineer, Todd Campbell of Hub City Recording, and to the Atomic Mosquitoes, who provide our theme music. This podcast is a service of the Mindfulness and Grief Institute. Visit us at mindfulnessandgrief.com to download your free copy of Navigating Grief and to learn more about our Awaken Meditation for Grief group and one-on-one support. I am your host, Heather Stang. May you find some peace in knowing you are not alone. And please be gentle with your grieving heart as you move through the rest of your day.